we're all carrying some set of toxic beliefs about work and success, this elusive relationship with success and what we're willing to do to get to the success. And I think to myself, who would we be without that story? Who would we be without the story that success is more? And what if success is less? What if it's less of what doesn't serve you and more of what does?
I'm Amy Woodall, and this is Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network, teaching you how to incorporate love and consciousness at work, home, and the world at large. You just heard from Karen Mangia, a Wall Street Journal bestselling author and Salesforce executive. Karen challenges what success has historically looked like. She says that we have to take a much more human approach to both our personal and our professional lives. In our conversation, Karen and I discuss a workplace awakening. People are saying enough is enough and demanding the creation of inclusive and balanced cultures. And Karen calls this the shift from progressive tolerance to progressive consciousness. And y'all know I love that term. It's a concept that she discusses in her latest book, Success from Anywhere. And we dive deep on its implication for the future of work. And be sure to hang around at the end of the show when I share with you my 3 takeaways that we can implement at work and at home. But before we get to that, let's start with Karen sharing her thoughts on improving the human experience.
When I think about the pandemic pause that we all arrived at simultaneously, it feels to me like we have come to a point where we're focused a little less on the customer experience at the cost of the employee experience or the stakeholder experience. And we are really arriving at a moment of opportunity where we are all focused on improving the human experience. I think about it as to live well is to work well, and to work well is to live well. How do these things work together? And how do we really focus on being more human and creating great human experiences?
It is so important. I'm even catching myself trying to correct when I say work and life. And I'm like, wait a second, that is so old. It's all one thing. They are not separate. We are the same human. We bring it to everything. So I think this conversation is really important. And several of the books, y'all, please follow Karen on LinkedIn, and we'll definitely make sure that we know all of the places that you can connect with her and learn from her. I did some binging of your talks. I really loved that TED Talk that you did. So some great stuff out there. But your most recent book, Success from Anywhere, I definitely want to dig into that on the podcast today. But I always want to start off with tell me what consciousness means to you as a part 1. And a part 2, what the heck does that mean from a leadership perspective?
I dedicate an entire chapter in the book to thinking about how we move from what I call progressive tolerance to progressive consciousness. A very simple example is think about the difference between children and adults getting into a pool. I mean, there could be ice cubes starting to float on top of a pool. And what does a child do? They run, they jump in, and they are in it to win it, right? And what do we do as adults? You stick one foot in it, it's like, right? And then you get down to the part where your bathing suit starts to touch and the little ice crystals are forming. And, eventually you work your way into the water, usually because you're there with that child. Now, what happens when you leave the pool? You're suddenly freezing cold again, right? Now, here's the reality. The temperature of the water did not change. What changed is your relationship with the water. You progressively learned to tolerate something that a loud voice inside of you initially responded, no, this is not good for you. Don't do it. And every day we live in this state of progressive tolerance inside of our teams, our organizations, and our lives. And to me, some of the telltale signs that we're in a state of progressively tolerating a set of circumstances that may not serve us shows up in sentences like, well, you can't fight City Hall. The grass isn't always greener. This isn't mine to fix. And the ultimate, it's not that bad. We say these phrases, right? And what we're doing is we're conditioning ourselves to tolerate something that everything inside of us as individuals, as employees, as leaders, is saying to us, this does not serve you. This is not you at your best. This is not a great set of circumstances. What I've discovered about progressive tolerance is that it almost always comes with a moment of awakening, a moment where there is something so dramatic that it shocks us into at least a moment of consciousness where we look around and say, how did I get here? To me, that's what's happening with the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter and the Great Resignation. It's people collectively arriving at a moment of awakening, a day of reckoning of sorts, and saying, what are we doing? This isn't okay. How did we get here? And therein lies the opportunity. We either stuff it back down because shame or fear or other limiting emotions show up, and then we just keep tolerating at a new level, or we step forward into what I call progressive consciousness. And progressive consciousness is the state where we realize that choice is always available. Choice is always on, choice is always available. And the place where choice lives is this present moment, not in the past and what you've tolerated or your past playbook for success, not in the future, right here, right now. Choice is what moves us from limited to limitless. Choice is what allows us to access the consciousness of being aware that we always have a choice. And people and organizations that are great about living in progressive consciousness and creating choice, their culture shows up differently. I mean, the talk track individually and collectively is more like, what else could this be? What else might be possible? I wonder.
I loved that phrase, by the way. Are you living in progressive tolerance or progressive consciousness? And you're right. I mean, sometimes those moments come and they kind of smack you in the face and you're just like, this is it. This is where I plant my feet, either as a collective, because we're all like, no more, we are done with this, or as an individual that just says, I'm done buying my own BS, or I'm done accepting this behavior from other people. And Karen, you and I could geek out all day long on the power of ownership. One of my keynotes is called Own Your 50, and it's just a more PC way of saying own your shit. But basically what that means is anytime we're faced with anything, we have a choice. How do I see it, respond to it, talk about it, feel about it emotionally, and question it? All of those things are always available, to us throughout. And I think what you mentioned on the leadership level, right? Consciousness as a leader. How are we challenging those things for us, ourselves? But then how are we coaching our team to do that too? And so Karen shares this not because life has always been easy and a bed of roses. You've had your journey that's gotten you to this place that says, I know there's a better way. Do you want to kind of share what's been your journey to this mindset in this place?
We create the stories that you were talking about as a way to keep ourselves safe. Right? The root of any of these stories that we tell ourselves, whether that's the grass isn't always greener, or this is as good as it gets, or this is what I deserve, those tend to be rooted in our childhood, in a space where we created those stories to keep ourselves safe and to survive. And for some period of time, that was maybe okay. The challenge is we tend to move all of those stories and a lot of those limiting beliefs into our adult life and into our leadership story. And when I hear those stories popping up for myself, that old talk track that plays sometimes, we all have those triggers and moments when it happens, or when I hear teams or leaders that are telling these stories like, well, we have to be in person to get work done. We're only going to be productive if we're in the office. You can only collaborate in person. I like to press pause on any of those stories or limiting beliefs and ask one question. Is that true? And if it is true, what evidence could you offer me that it's 100% absolutely true? And usually that's where the story starts to break down. Now, one of the most damaging stories I ever told myself that was keeping me stuck in a place I didn't want to be was, I will never be healthy. And what was shocking about that story was I was telling myself that story in my early 30s. And picture this scene. If you looked at my LinkedIn and my life, it appeared to be quite enviable. The trajectory up and to the right, like I must be that elusive phrase, having it all together, which wasn't true, but it looked great. And a set of mysterious things were happening to me. I would notice I was starting to gain a little weight, and I would explain it away with the story of I've been with a lot of customers, we're having these dinners, you eat a little more. Then I would skip my workout in the morning to do the work I didn't do at the customer dinner. And I did what we all do. I rationalized, I progressively tolerated a set of symptoms that were increasing. And so I was progressively tolerating them until one day I had an attention grabbing moment. I went to call my brother and I picked up my mobile device. I could not remember his name. Now I have one brother and I talk to him every week. I had to use the process of elimination, like we have the same last name, shorten the contact list until I could identify who he was. We use this phrase, that gave me pause. And usually those moments that give us pause, that moment of awakening we were talking about in that progressive tolerance loop, is something that's so dramatic and dire, it's forced on us in a way that is diminishing in some sense. In my case, that moment started a 3.5-year medical misdiagnosis journey where it might surprise you to discover looking at me now that my hair fell out, my skin turned gray, I had perpetual, relentless fatigue, no matter how much I slept. I gained 55 pounds without having a baby. And one day I looked in the mirror and my eyes were literally a different color. I literally did not know the person looking back at me. And for as terrifying as the medical aspect of that was to me, what was even more terrifying is how am I going to sustain this formula for success I've created and believe to be absolutely true? I think a definition of success that we all buy into, like you have to do more to have more to be more, and that will sum up to success. Well, I had a point where I could no longer do more. And in that moment where people couldn't figure out what was wrong, I started telling myself this story like, I'll never be healthy. And in that 3.5 years, I never missed one day of work for being ill. What was interesting is when I finally found a physician who believed in me and in my story and wanted to get to the root cause, the underlying issue was DDT pesticide poisoning. Now, if you're looking for something to try, I don't really recommend it. However, the irony that struck me was, yes, there was actual poison going through my body. And yet what stopped me short of perhaps getting to a diagnosis and a cure sooner is a set of toxic beliefs that I was carrying that needed to go. When you change your story, you change your results. And my story was, I want to be healthy enough to enjoy my life, whatever that's going to take. And it became an instant filter for what I said yes and no to, where I spent my energy, how I cared for myself. It took another 5 years to get to a completely clean bill of health. And when I think about my story, we're all carrying some set of toxic beliefs about work and success, this elusive relationship with success and what we're willing to do to get to the success. And I think to myself, who would we be without that story? Who would we be without the story that success is more? And what if success is less? What if it's less of what doesn't serve you and more of what does?
It's a scary question for many high achievers to ask themselves, right? Because often their okayness or their worthiness on a subconscious level, I don't think we always know this on a conscious level, hinges on achievement. What have I done? What is my title? Where am I traveling to? How much money do I make? But I think the gift in, and we continue to say this, what was the silver lining of 2020 for all of us? I think what it allowed high achievers to do, and many other people, even if you don't self-identify as high achiever, to say, there's a different way about this. And I think burnout came from when we live in that I have to do and less in the I get to be, right? And so I think it's an important conversation. I love being able to interview experts like yourself every month and just pick your brain of, how do you get there? What are the new questions that you ask yourself as you're moving along the way? And, in the book of The Success from Anywhere, you talk a lot about how do we shift the idea of what fun and a good environment and what success really looks like. So if you had a microphone that the whole world could hear and you could just blast it, you could just give this message and sing it from the rooftops, what do you think is most important for people, leaders, organizations to hear about that shift in success?
What matters? That's what it comes down to. The pandemic pause brought us to asking that question simultaneously, what matters? And we discovered the answer in many cases was something different than how we were living our lives. That's why you see the great resignation. That's why you see a rise in entrepreneurship. That's why you see a rise in employers offering mental health and well-being benefits. Because when everything got stripped away, our freedom to move about, our social engagements and opportunities, and we took stock of what matters, it wasn't one more Zoom meeting. It wasn't one more tweet. It was taking care of ourselves, having meaningful relationships, live well, work well. In the book and in the playbook that goes along with it, I take readers through something called the stress-free experiment to help bring clarity to what matters. And what I love about this experiment is it was started by a group of scientists at Stanford University. And their initial experiment was with a group of university students reporting a very high degree of burnout. And they gave the students an assignment. They said, over a holiday break, you're going to spend 10 minutes each day with a physical pen and paper. You remember those, right? Physical pens and paper. You're going to set a timer for 10 minutes, and then you're just going to write in a journal. There's no grades for grammar or spelling. You don't even have to read what you wrote. And then they selected a small group of students and they said, for you, we have a special assignment. For you, you're going to spend your 10 minutes writing about your top value and how your top value shows up in everyday life. Now, the scientists at Stanford have gone on to repeat this experiment thousands and thousands of times with everyone from entrepreneurs to executives and everyone in between. The results are the same. If you spend 10 minutes with a physical pen and paper, even one time, writing about your top value and how your top value shows up in everyday life, you will demonstrate a measurability to access greater resilience, new ideas, report a lower degree of burnout, and a higher degree of satisfaction in your life. Being clear about your values helps you tap into your own resilience. And even if your circumstances don't change, knowing your values makes it possible for you to change your relationship with your circumstances. And I invite every listener and every leader to try this experiment. Do it on your own, and then do it with your team or with your organization. And if you see a significant mismatch between your values and your team or your organization's values, no wonder you're feeling burnt out. I mean, burnout at its core is living outside of your values for an extended period of time. And that's the reconciliation we see happening. And the core of all of that is the question that I started with: what matters?
As you did this exercise for you, and I'm sure you've been living this, much longer than it's been relevant out in the world, what are some of those top things for you? And how did you identify, for listeners here who might be like, okay, values. I like a bargain. What's the formula for identifying? And do you mind sharing some of yours?
I made it easy because on my website, there is a free, ungated, you don't even have to give me your email address, video called The Stress-Free Experiment. And inside of it, there's a table. This same table appears in the book and the playbook with a list of values, so you don't even have to think of them. You could just choose one. Or maybe the list inspires you to choose a different one. By the way, you can repeat the experiment as many times as you wish. The results only exponentially increase. In my case, I place a very high value on wellness and well-being, as you might expect. And I have an absolutely unapologetic set of routines, rituals, and boundaries about how I start and conclude my day, and about how I have a healthy relationship with work and keep that in its appropriate place. I have discovered that absent routine, rituals, and boundaries, particularly for stopping work, I would be happy to go on forever. It's partially because I like what I do. It's not because someone else is saying, like, you must keep going. I genuinely enjoy it. However, I don't enjoy it at the cost of enjoying my life or taking care of myself or my family or my loved ones. So unapologetic, well-being at the top of the list, routines, rituals, and boundaries that support that. And to me, what's critical about that wellness value is having it show up in my everyday life so that I don't get to the point of needing what I call the grand gesture, right? I'm so burnt out now, I'm picturing a month of vacation. I'm so burnt out, I need 14 hours of sleep. I find that self-care and well-being are a mindset. And when I incorporate those activities a little bit at a time into every day, I stay refreshed and more centered and spend much less time imagining a grand escape or needing to overcorrect. Second for me is family. I'm fortunate that my 98-and-a-half-year-old, very Sicilian World War II veteran grandfather is not only alive and vibrant, he is day trading stocks on his 3 iPads with a smartwatch. I cook him Sunday dinner every Sunday. He still lives in his own home. And that time is sacred to me, along with other family relationships. That's another one of my commitments that is absolutely sacred. Cook Sunday dinner for my grandfather. We have our rituals. We eat. Then we have a cup of coffee. We review my stock portfolio. It's precious time. And I'm clear that those are choices I can make every day to have those values show up in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I think it's so great to be reflective, right? This is where consciousness is so important. Consciousness is not something that happens by accident. It is a habit of us reflecting, saying, no one's just going to give me what I need to make me happy. First of all, no one else is responsible for your happiness but you. But it's also, how can I be intentional about aligning my day, my work, my habits and hobbies with where those values come in. And I really appreciate the non-negotiables, Karen, because I think what happens with women or just with people in general, when we have so many roles that we play, it's easy to allow our non-negotiables to be up for debate. So maybe I won't take that time to work out or do yoga or meditate because I'm really busy and things are crazy at work right now and I just need to hop in and I need to schedule that meeting earlier. And then we get down this rabbit hole. And as you mentioned, we don't need the pause. We need the stick my head in the sand. I am done. So love that you have that distinction for you. You had shared that you were going on a really cool trip and journey, that you were meeting somebody many of us, I'm sure, have heard of, Deepak Chopra. Share what that did for you and probably up-leveling some of those non-negotiables as well.
When I think back to my first book, Success with Less, and the focus of that is a new formula for success that I encapsulate as pause, ponder, prioritize. And that was on the other side of that major medical crisis I talked about and the gift of reaching a turning point in my relationship with success. If you read through that book, you'll discover I share a series of ways to take a pause. And I say in the book, specifically, I tried yoga and meditation and it wasn't my thing at the time. And what I discovered was I would sit completely still and find restoration in a sunset. That, in a sense, was my meditation. Now, come forward many years, I've reconsidered. I've changed. None of us are the same person, for example, on this side of the pandemic as we were coming in. And I've continued to focus on deepening my understanding of myself and my relationship with the world around me and releasing people and experiences that no longer serve me, as we all do from time to time. To take that to another level, though, sometimes it helps to have an expert teacher and guide. And I came to an inflection point, actually, when I was writing Success from Anywhere, when I thought about how much of my life I spent looking for work to do something for me. And I think we all do this to some degree. We look for work to give us approval, acceptance, belonging, declare us a success, validate us. And what I realized was all of those things that I was looking for in work, but we look for them in other external places, they were all available inside. So it was permission granted, as I would say to any of your listeners, to do what you know you need to do to care for yourself. And in this case, the next step in my learning journey was to spend 5 days on the side of a mountain in Canada with Deepak Chopra and his team, exploring the topic of infinite possibilities. And what an incredible gift to be able to create space with no technology devices and to follow a schedule of twice a day meditation, twice a day yoga, spaced out with really incredible teaching about how we all have access to infinite possibilities, and then how to slowly bring that down into a plan where you kind of ask how, based on your intention. until you can get to an action that you can take as soon as that day. What that experience helped me to see is the most important, best work that I can do to be a more high impact leader, to be a more compassionate human being, to be a better family member and friend, is to continue to do the work on myself, to learn how to be fully present, fully available in the moment, to create choices, and to also be able to see sometimes when we feel stuck, it's because we're not looking at what's limiting us. We're not looking to create choices. And it really helped shift my mindset to another level. And I, of course, like any class or learning experience, gained some new tools for self-reflection and some tools to help reset in the moment, right? So sometimes it isn't always the big thing that happens. It's the person in traffic that's driving really slow in the left lane, or the person at the checkout counter that's like having an extended conversation with every person when you're in a hurry. It's those moments, right? I think where we have those little snap flare-ups of not being conscious, present, patient, compassionate, and kind. And so it was really some new tools to press pause, in addition to, of course, being incredibly inspiring.
It's a great habit that we can see that you have of when you're just looking to up-level things externally, you don't look to manipulate the external things, right? You're like, hang on a second, what can I learn? Where do I go in? How do I talk to myself differently? Learn to shift the emotions, sit quietly. And I think that is, man, that's a conscious just step for anybody to take. Anyone who is listening, whatever you're frustrated with, before you think you need to change it externally, go within. I want to take it to the opposite end of the spectrum and hear what advice you might have for some folks. I've been in some meetings over the last couple of weeks and had a chance to meet with some executives that said, Amy, we still have this expectation that if we can't see you, you must not be working. We're having a hard time bringing new talent in because we refuse to go to a hybrid and or remote work environment. So for the people who are on the other end that are still trying to tightly cling to what was prior to this change of 2020, what advice do you give them from your level of expertise of how do they make that change and or what's going to happen if they don't?
This is a different example of progressive tolerance, and think about it in this context. Do you remember when the internet and internet access was becoming a newer thing at work? And the belief that went along with internet access was what? Well, if you're just surfing the web, as would have been the phrase at the time, you're not being productive. Now, I want you to think about that. There was a moment in time in the world of work where the prevailing point of view was we should lock down certain websites and only grant access during certain hours, because if you were using the internet, you were not being productive. Now, same with mobile phones. You would have to come into an office, power this off completely. This was not a normal thing. People thought if you were on your device, on a mobile device of some kind, you were not being productive. That's not what work is. It's absurd when we think about that now, isn't it? Imagine if I said to you, Amy, I just want to make sure that you're going to get everything done today. And in order to do that, I'm going to restrict you to only be able to have access to the company email and to the company website. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? It sounds very dated, but that's how we work now. And that's the inflection point we're at. This is an invitation to a different way to work. And it's just as uncomfortable now as it was for the leader trying to imagine how to shut down the NCAA website at March Madness basketball tournament time to make sure everyone was focused on doing work. What this comes down to, whether it's 1999, 2009, or 2022 and beyond, is trust. The question that everyone is asking every single day of one another and not saying out loud is, can I trust you? And the organizations that are struggling with this distributed world of work have a culture that is not based on trust. Every issue is a trust issue. Everything stopping us is really about a set of limiting beliefs. Now, I work in the technology industry, and I can tell you for well over a decade, the technology has existed for people to work from mountaintops and sailboats and beaches. And we all know people who have done it. What's happening right now is a challenge to the power structure and the hierarchy that says essentially, who am I as a leader if I can't see you, be seen, and run a culture and politics of see and be seen? Who am I now? What will become of me? What's my contribution? The work that needs to be done is about shifting the expectations and the role, particularly of middle managers inside of organizations. People who are coming to work for you now are looking to build a network of networks. They're looking for greater degrees of trust and ownership. As a leader, there is a choice for you to empower that and be a very high impact leader. This just challenges some myths and misperceptions and long held beliefs that are now limiting that we hold about what work is, where work happens, when work happens, who does work, and most critically, the value of middle managers.
Great points. And everybody listening, I think whether you're already on the track of getting there and you're like, we understand this is where we're going. It's not the future of work, it's the present of work. So we're on the way. Or the people who are saying, gosh, our industry's so far behind, we've got to get there. Really encourage you to buy Karen's books, read them. There is really great nuggets in there about how we can get on board and innovate and continue to move things forward, both as an individual and I think some great ideas for companies as well. And I think the question to continue to ask ourselves, right, is am I being so stubborn in my self-righteousness, if you will, because it's my personal preference? Or is it because I truly believe it's for the greater good? And most of the time, it's just how we think it should be. And we are alienating so many other people.
And think about what happens. You hit on an important point that I want to pull forward there, which is the same reaction is true of a toddler as it is of a senior executive or working professional when we default to a mandate as opposed to meaning. If I looked at you right now and I said, Amy, as soon as we finish our conversation today, you're going to go take a walk for 10 minutes, you're going to have a glass of water, and then you're going to call your mom. What would happen? A force would rise up inside of you called resistance. And what would your thought be? You can't make me, right? Think about this. You have a child, right? People have children. You say this to someone, that mindset is the same. No one likes to be told or mandated what to do absent a meaning. And the reality of issuing a return to work mandate at this point is that people are like, well, what's the meaning of that? What's the purpose behind that?
As a middle child, you're right. That would be my response, Karen. I would be like, nobody's the boss of me. You're not telling me what to do. We like to have options and to make our own decisions. And if you really have a hard time feeling as though your team is going to be productive, that is such a trust issue. The issues go beyond. It's bigger than just having a remote environment. I think the problems in our organizations, as things shift quickly, as we move from tolerance to this consciousness, as you shared in your wisdom, the problems were already there. The cracks were in the foundation. They were just busted wide open in an instant. And now we get a chance to decide how we fill them differently so that we have lasting power, innovate or die, as we often say in business. Karen, it's been a delight. I could just listen to you all day, just, share over and over. Fortunately, there's lots of really good stuff out there. And so can you share with the audience the best places to reach you?
I am on all the social media platforms that I regularly post new content and what I'm discovering, and invite you to do the same on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And subscribe to the YouTube channel where you can find these little 2-minute videos that explain some of these concepts, as well as a new podcast and a full-length TV show.
Before we wrap up this episode, here are my 3 takeaways from Karen and how we can be a better leader or just a better human on the planet. Number 1, I loved this concept of progressive tolerance versus progressive consciousness. Which one are you living in? The world has changed. We all kind of have to be okay with that. And either we accept the change and move on, or we get left behind. And so, if we're a leader, are we leaning into this progressive consciousness because people are unwilling to accept anything less? And I don't love this phrase, but there's a lot of talk on the quote unquote war on talent or the talent shortage. If we want to bring in the best of the best, we have to be different. And it's not just, that pressure we put on ourselves as a leader, but think of the ripple effect that we have on people's lives and their work when we choose to show up in this mindset and with this behavior. And number two, I want to reflect on Karen's message about how we shift our perception of success by what we're focusing on and what matters. A, what does success look like to you right now? I'm a big believer that often we kind of chase happiness and success thinking that it exists somewhere outside of us. And we get to that place and think, wow, I've gotten further than I ever thought I would before. Where's that satisfaction? Where's that pat on the back I thought I was going to feel like I earned? It's because everything we think that we're looking for outside of us exists within us right now. Are you focusing on what matters? Do you know what that looks like? What a great exercise for us to take time to lean into. And I was just with a group of leaders, banking leaders actually yesterday. We were talking about how what has really shifted for us, specifically in a leadership role, is our need to be more intentional with our time so that we're not burning ourselves out and we're not missing the things that our team might need if they're in a virtual setting. So what matters? And number three, consciousness can seem like an abstract and this hard to grasp concept, but remember, it all starts from within. The thing is, when external factors are frustrating us, we can either point at that thing that we likely have little to no control over changing, or we can look within and start to question, why does it frustrate me? Does this deserve my peace in this moment? Is there a way I can look at this more compassionately? Can I be more present, more patient, more kind? And when we do that, it's not that we let that outside situation off the hook, or we don't seek change, or we don't hold somebody accountable. It just means we don't have to suffer in the midst of that change or that accountability. Suffering is an option. It's not a requirement. And consciousness allows the awareness for us to reflect on making that emotional and mental shift happen. Thank you so much for listening to Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network. If you have questions for me or our guest, or you just really dig this topic of consciousness, I encourage you to find us on Facebook and join the Conscious Habit community. If you're curious about this conversation of consciousness for your organization or for your group, come check us out at theconscioushabit.com. Until next time, do the world a favor and go love yourself.